you know that you're the smallest minority in the United States, right? Like even smaller than like American Inuit and like Eskimo and stuff like that. She's like, it's less than 1% of you that have been to war and seen combat. And she goes, we need to know about the humanity and the complexity and the barbarity of combat. And we don't know enough. And these stories are not told for us to either learn from it or avoid it. And she goes, because you guys stay silent. And she goes, and that's the travesty. We're going to lose all these stories we need to hear to the annals of history. And she goes, travesty. And that freed me up. I was like, okay, maybe I do need to write about this. And then also at the same time, McVeigh, who was the guy who dragged the Louise Kim from the street, had started like a little WordPress thing. And he was like, I don't want to die if, you know, I get sick one day and have my kids not know like what happened to me. And so he was just going over old maps and putting his stories up there. And I was like, that's really brave of him to do. And it just freed me up. And so I began writing about it, and people loved this stuff. Like every time I would write about war, they freaking loved it. And because people are curious, like one of my friends is the lead singer of a band called Silent Planet. His name's Garrett Russell. He's a pacifist, fascinated by war. The human nature is fascinated by war. He's like, yeah, I'll go see every war movie and read these books. I'm fascinated by it. He's even wrote lyrics to it. And he's like, I want to know. I think we need to know. And I just realized that even in fiction, you can be the most anti-war person ever, but you're going to go watch Avengers. You're going to watch Star Wars. That's all wars. Yeah. You know, there's something ingrained in the human psyche that is fascinated by it. And we need to learn from it. And we need to hear from our veterans and everything. And so I began writing about it, which turned into, you know, getting an agent and a book deal. So it was crazy.
Yeah. Before we get into the book, there's one question I wanted to ask about, kind of in particular, that the transition process for veterans is, I would say, historically difficult. And a lot, I'd say most people understand that, have some grasp that, that transition phase from your identity being a military service member to where now you're not. And, some guys struggle really, really difficult times with that. Some don't. There's a lot of studies and literature on why that's the case, and that could be debated or studied forever. From your perspective, between what you went through writing the book, the advocacy stuff that you've done for years, if you personally could develop a strategy, a protocol for transitioning people out of the military, specifically combat veterans, what does that look like to you? Like, let's say you're the Department of Defense transition expert, and they say, Ben, develop a protocol for transitioning combat veterans from the military into civilian existence. What does that look like? And I'll caveat or preface that with, I know that it's gonna vary from person to person, but from kind of a 30,000-foot view, is there some highlights that you would?
Well, you put me on the spot. There's some problems in society we have to address first. So one of the most jarring things for me, when I got out, I moved into geopolitical intelligence. Go figure. I ended up working for a company called Stratfor Rain. Loved it there. One of my coworkers, and he's still one of my clients, one of my closest friends is a guy named Peter Zion. He's a geopolitical expert, and we still debate each other. But, civil affairs, it makes sense. Like, that's what you go into. And I was doing graphic design. So I was like, at the time, like tracking cartel movements in like Mexico and understanding like, okay, the Sinaloa cartel and El Chapo control this area and whatnot and everything, but I would translate it graphically. So you had to have the mind and then the artistic expression for it as far as everything. And so I'm working with all these like very bright analysts and everything. Eventually we got hacked by Anonymous and whatnot, but this was the part, even being in that environment and as good as it was, and I love the people there, what I realized, nobody has my back. So if you transition out of the military into a civilian and corporate environment, consider the following. Most people are trying to stab their way to the top. Your CEO is trying to make profits over people. Now, we know in the military, leaders eat what?
Well, they should eat last.
They should eat last, yeah. And that's kind of ingrained in the psyche. You know, the general's always going to do it, even if it's just for a PR look. But the good soldiers and the good leaders, they do that. And I was in an environment where I was with good leaders and good officers who emulated those characteristics and those traits. So I was of the assumption, this is the way that the world operates. And you have to remember that when you go into the military, you are stripped of an identity you have and given a new one. They're going to take away your clothes. They're going to shave your head. You're going to look like everybody else. They're going to break you down until you become exactly what they want you to be. And that new identity is formed. And so there's no way to reshape kind of that and ingratiate the civilian aspect. So when I got into the corporate environment, I was like, everybody is trampling over each other to get ahead. I was like, it's about, like the CEO will gladly toss out people to make an extra dollar. Like you look at every single like hedge fund in the world, or you look at most corporations now, that's the way they operate. The CEOs at the top are going to make bajillions of dollars and everything else. And everybody else is going to like, oh, I got to climb the corporate ladder. Fuck this guy, you know? And so nobody had my 6. Leaders didn't eat last. And I was like, what the fuck, man? And that messed me up. So I didn't know to expect that. Like the way things are in the military are not the way that they are in the civilian world. And you have to remind people of that. So there has to be like some type of training, like, look, man, we know you're going into this. It doesn't operate this way. And you can't call people cocksuckers and knife hand them all the time. You're going to get fired. Yeah. And I think the reality of the situation is you get I meet a lot of guys in Colorado Springs that are like, oh yeah, I'm service connected for post-traumatic stress. And I'm like, oh, what'd you do? And they're like, oh, I was in the Air Force and worked on computers. I was like, what? And that doesn't make sense. What they're dealing with are transition disorders. They don't know how to reintegrate into the civilian society because that new identity is formed. If I was the DOD, the thing that I had to do was, over your life, different identities are going to form. You might become a husband. That's an identity. You might become a father. That's a new identity. For me, I was the metalhead growing up, and this will bring it full circle. And I never thought that was acceptable, you know. There's the veteran, the warrior side of me, but I didn't think that was acceptable to some people. You have got to learn how to ingratiate the aspects of you the same way that you're an emotional, intellectual, spiritual, physical being. You have to incorporate all those elements together. You have to incorporate your identity from the military to your civilian identity to everything else. You have to discover who you are. And there has to be a discovery process. Now, I think the special operations community is doing a really good job at this. And it's unfortunate for the rest. That's only like 1%. So you have like entities like Folds of Honor, right? And they go in and they take, I think it's Folds of Honor. My buddy's Steve's going through it right now, where they're basically they're doing a better job of transitioning out, and they work with these mentors. They begin to find civilian stuff, and they're able to transition into that civilian prospect a little bit easier, as opposed to just the like, hey, you're out, don't let the door kick you out on the way out, and then you struggle, you're living under a bridge or whatever. So there has to be some type of easement into that world at the same time. But specifically for combat veterans, like if you saw combat, like you need to deal with the shit you went through, because there's nothing brave about you staying stuck exactly where you are.